Welcome to MacGyver's Workshop, where you never know what we're going to be working on next. If you're not too careful, you just might learn something. Hi there. Welcome to MacGyver's Workshop, where you never know what we're going to be working on next, and if you're not too careful, you just might learn something. So, thanks for joining us in part 2 of our Rochester Quadrajet 4-barrel rebuild here. We're still waiting on the float. We had to order that. It should be in here tomorrow, I believe. But in the meantime, we'll start with what we've got and work our way back up. And putting that float in can be like the last thing we do before we bolt the top back, the air horn back on the carburetor. So going back together with it, in the reverse of disassembly, we'll start from the bottom and work our way up. So we got all our parts nice and spiffy clean now. They soaked overnight, and the first thing we're going to do is we got the carb kit here, and what we need to do is you always want to take and check the gaskets, because they always provide more than one gasket for stuff. So the same kit may service 2, 3, 4, 5 different carburetors, so part numbers. So you always want to take and go against your old gasket and line it up, and just hold it up to the light and make sure that all the holes are there in the right places, and you'll be good to go. So I've already done that with the gaskets here. This was the extra one that we're not going to use, and so we're all ready when we start doing that. But the first thing I got to do that I'd mentioned in the last video is I have to fix this so that the these secondaries are actually opening all the way. These secondaries should be 90 degrees to the relative to the base plate, and if they're not opening fully, then well, you're gonna lose power at full throttle, because you ain't got as much carburetor as you're supposed to have here. So now how we adjust that, I'll have to get up here and kind of show you a little bit here. There's a little, okay, so how do we get there from here? This little linkage right here we'll have to adjust until when we have the throttle all the way open, that both of these butterflies, primary and secondary, are open 90 degrees relative to the throttle plate. All right, so now that we adjusted this little linkage right here, this little tab, now when we open the throttle all the way, okay, our butterflies are opening to 90 degrees. So there we go. So we're good with that. And as part of the cleaning process, I took the 2 little idle mixture screws out here, and they have a special head on them. I know there's people that talk about you can take and cut a slot in them so you can use a straight tip screwdriver, and the carburetor on Old Blue over here came that way, and I'll tell you what, that's the biggest pain in the butt. So trying to get that screwdriver lined up on that makeshift slot that somebody cut in those mixture screws. For 20 bucks you can get the tool at just about every auto parts store, and then you don't have to worry about it. run these screws all the way in till they're lightly seated. You don't want to really wrench them in there. That's not good. And then usually what I'll do is I'll just take and make a mark with my Sharpie here, and bring them out 2.5 turns. So that's 1, 2.5. And 1, 2.5. That's usually a good baseline to start with when you put the carburetor on the motor, and it'll start up and run and idle, no problem for you. So now the next thing to do is we will join our throttle plate to the body. Alright, so I got my 3 throttle plate to body bolts going on here. These things have a habit of coming loose just through vibration, normal use. If you're really concerned about it, you could always take and put just a tiny drop of thread locker, and not the super duper Zilla stuff, but just the light duty stuff. And that'll help keep them from shaking loose. Now the next fun part here involves putting this choke housing back in, and let me zoom the camera in for you a little bit so you can kind of get an idea of what we're dealing with here. So we have to line this choke linkage up here when we put our choke housing back on. So what we want to do is have the tang, if you will, on the shaft lined up with this lever here, and then we can drop this down in there. And get her to line up and go in there. Don't feel bad if you don't get it right the first time. Sometimes it takes a couple tries to get it. There we go. Alright, and we get our housing lined up there like so. And then, from there, we put our screw in. Get that lined up. We get that screw started right here. Now that's probably the most challenging part, believe it or not, of the whole rebuild project, is getting that lined up. The next thing we want to do is to get our choke pull-off set up right here. And this one has a couple of different linkages on it. So what you want to do is kind of line that up and get that on there. We won't worry about this green rod right now until we get the air horn on. And then we'll put our little tapered screws back in here. There we go. That's all in there where it needs to be. So now we got our hook housing in place and everything is where it needs to be. The next thing we want to do is put our little primary metering jets back where they belong. And sometimes that can be a little tricky, as they sit down there in a real tight spot, but if you're careful and you're patient, you'll get them in there. And don't try and force it. They should thread in there real easy, you know, not give you any fuss. If they do, you're doing it wrong. Before we can get our power piston in here, we got to put our needle and seat and our float in there. And your big giant screwdriver works best for that, so it can span across the width of that seat there. And get it, start threading in there. Get it nice and snug. Now your little needle here is going to have this little tiny wire, crazy little wire thing on it. I don't even know how easy that'll show up in the camera there, but it has to loop around the top of the needle here, and then it goes on the float like that. And drop it all down in there. And it might seem like a bit tricky, but it's doable if you're careful. Just remember, be careful and be patient. The next thing we'll want to do is replace our little check ball for the accelerator pump that goes down in there, and then put our little tiny retaining screw that keeps that check ball down in there. Kind of makes it like a little check valve. That's what makes the accelerator pump work. Speaking of accelerator pump, your kit comes with a new spring and a new rubber seal here, and you reuse all the rest of this. And the kit gives you an installation tool so you don't ruin your new rubber piece when you go to put it on there. So I can go ahead and just pull this off. That's done and gone. Take our spring off of here. That's our old one. And you got this little cone thingy here, and that allows you to slide this on. Now what I like to do is take a little Vaseline and put on there, make it slide easier. Take and coat this with a little bit of Vaseline. That'll help. That will help this go on a whole lot nicer. See? You just kind of slid and popped right on there. Easy peasy. And then we'll put our new spring in there. And we want to be real gentle and just kind of peel this rubber out of the way while we roll this spring in here. And that's what you should have when you're all said and done. We need to adjust our float level here. Now it's going to be different depending on the carburetor, so you have to check with your documentation that came with the kit and make sure you get it right. Okay, so once we got our float in there, we got it adjusted, we got our this little plastic piece that sets in there. Now we can finally put our power piston in. Now it makes it a little tricky because you have to kind of line these metering rods up with those jets, but you can't really see them because this piece of plastic and the float is in your way. So you kind of have to work by feel, but once you get it, you'll know because it'll go, the power piston will go all the way down, and you can press your little collar in here. I swedged the top of it so it'll hold better. And there she goes. Now she is in there. All right. Now your gasket here has a little opening that you have to work with to work around this power piston here. But that's usually not too difficult. There you go. Make sure your choke rod is where it belongs. Set those down on your little dowels there. And then, again, I like to use just a tiny bit of Vaseline here, just to kind of lube this rubber up on the accelerator pump. Maybe run a little bit down in there with my finger. And get that down in there. There, at that point, we're ready to drop the air horn back down on it. All right. This can be a wee bit on the tricky side because you got to get these secondary metering rods to go down in there where they belong, and at the same time you want your choke rod to come up here through its little hole the way it should. And additionally, you have to get the accelerator pump piston to come up through its hole like it should. And it's like one big choreographed maneuver here. And gotta be really, really, really careful because we want those, we don't want to bend those metering rods. So if you flip this butterfly down here and hold it up, hold those metering rods up, then that should let you get this air horn on here just the way you need it. I start with these two real long screws that go in the back here. Get them started. They thread all the way through down into the throttle plate. So if you were looking at the throttle plate screws and wonder, wow, there's only 3. Well, that's why, because the other 2 come down from the top. Put them down in there. Don't tighten them, just lightly snug them. Then you have some different length. You may have some different length screws here. So you always want to check and make sure. Okay, so we're good. These are all the same length. And drop them in their respective holes. And that'll be the end of that. All right, the next thing we'll do is we will put our accelerator pump rod on here. Now this one was set to the inside one, so we will go back with that. Then, since we left us a little bitty gap to put our, we left a little tiny gap to get a screwdriver in there for our roll pin. And all you have to do is just pop it back in there And you'll hear the accelerator pump go every time you do that. And we don't want to forget our little T20 screws that go down inside the air horn here, right by the boosters. We get those in there and snug those guys up. It's, like I had said before, you don't ever want to mess with these two screws while the carburetor is on the car, because if they fall, you drop it and it falls down into the motor, and that could be a challenge getting them out. All right, that's in there really nicely. Now we can start working on assembling our choke linkage. Now I'll put our little linkage on here that goes on here for the choke butterfly. We can line that up. And start our screw there. That going. And throughout the process, you want to double check, make sure everything moves nice and freely and easily. And then this is going to be our other linkage that goes here for that. And again, you know, you may have to finagle some of this stuff and work with it to get it to go on the way you want it to. But all in all, it's easy. It's usually quite easy. It can make you think like you're going to go crazy sometimes, but it's really not that bad. Not really. And there we go. That's what you call a finagle. And you finagle it on there without having to disassemble the whole thing. There we go. How about that, huh? Okay. All right, next step, put our little electric choke back in there. Now we're not going to bother putting that rivet back in there, but you want to line your spring up with this little tab in here. And make sure you got it right by rotating it back and forth so you know you're on there where it needs to be. And since it's summertime, it's going to be a little warm. Not going to need a super hard bit of choke, so we'll go 1 or 2 ticks towards lean, and then we get one of our screws in here. Get them started, then lock it down, and then we'll experiment with it on the truck and see how it does. All right. Now, make sure we're good here. And your kit will come with a new little gasket that goes right on here. You know, sometimes folks think that you have to have Teflon tape or thread sealant on here, but you really don't, because that's what this little vinyl or plastic or nylon or whatever it is, this little ring does. And it goes right on the end of the fitting there, and that is what seals this when you run it in there. Then we just gently tighten that. That's all it needs. All right. And we'll put our air cleaner screw back on here. Or stud, whatever you want to call it. And we've got our new gasket that goes there like so. And we have our new gasket that goes from between the carburetor and the manifold. And she's ready to go back on the truck. So, just to refresh, the most important thing about overhauling one of these carburetors is to make sure that you in this center section of the body, if you soak it in that chem dip, most likely you'll be good, and it'll get down into all those little emulsion tubes and things like that and break loose everything. And then once you hit it with the carbon choke cleaner and compressed air, it'll make sure that those tubes are clear. And most of the time when you have a failed rebuild and it doesn't run like you expect it to, that's why. It's because those enough attention wasn't paid to those emulsion tubes. As a matter of fact, quadrajetparts.com, they go so far as to recommend that you completely pull those idle pickup tubes out and replace them, rather than try and clean them. I usually have good luck getting them clean and clear, and I've never had a problem, adjusting my idle mixture and getting them to run right. But, if you run up on one that's being real finicky like that, that's probably where I would look if everything else is good to go. So, All right, let's we're going to get this thing back on the truck, and we'll see how she does. Taking her out for a road test here. Seems to be running pretty good. Back in the day, I used to have a 78 Chevy with C10. It was called it the heavy half. I love that truck. The only thing is on a quiet night you can listen to them rust. That was the only bad thing about it. Give her some beans and see what she does here. Bad. Okay. So far, so good. Had a vicious oil leak. It's got the two oil pressure sensors. It's got the one up behind the distributor that runs the gauge like you're used to seeing on any usual small block Chevy. But then there's also another one down at the bottom, right above the oil filter, and that one is there's a choke light in the dash, and when you turn the key on, choke light comes on, and as soon as it builds up oil pressure, then it will the switch will make, and that applies power to the electric choke. And as long as you got oil pressure there, then electric choke will have power and start the sequence of, as the engine's warming up, will gradually let the choke off. See, that's all old school stuff, everything fuel injection now, you don't have to worry about it. Back in the day, in my day, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and everything had a carburetor and a manual choke or whatever, and you had to come out in the morning on a cold morning and pump it twice and crank it up and then keep fiddling with the throttle to keep it running until it warms up, because maybe the choke wasn't just right on it. But yeah, I think I'm going to call this carburetor fixed. And we'll drive it around just a little bit. Make sure everything's kosher. Like my poor camera didn't know what to focus on, didn't it? Looks like it's focusing on the windshield. Yeah, that's better. Yeah. My dog doesn't recognize this truck, so she's going ape shit. Alright. I reckon we'll call this thing done. Alright. So we're gonna call that truck fixed. I called the kid and let him know. He did have a couple of oil leaks. This one is a sensor leaking pretty good clip, but it's not the one for the gauge, it's the one for the choke light. So just went ahead and plugged it off for the time being until he can get the sensor, because nobody carries it in stock. You'll have to order it. And you know, and as you saw on my phone video, we kind of took it out and drove it around a bit, and she's running like a champ now. So it still kind of bothers me, you know, that never did find an actual smoking gun root cause, but there was obviously something stuck or clogged up somewhere that was not allowing that fuel to get into the carburetor. So, but either way, you know, check the fuel tank selector switch, because it does have dual tanks. Made sure everything was kosher there, and it's pulling fuel and pumping fuel, so we're good. And yeah, we're gonna call it done. So thank you for watching, and please subscribe, you know, if you like what you see. Like I say, you never know what we're going to be getting into next here, and you know, and it's fun. That's what matters. It's my therapy here. So again, please subscribe, and don't be afraid to post a comment, and good, bad, or otherwise. You catch me doing something that that I'm doing wrong, don't be afraid to call me out. I don't mind learning something new. So also, you can email me directly at MacGyversWorkshop@gmail.com, or you can visit our website at www.MacGyversWorkshop.net. So thanks for watching again, and we'll see you next time, when I imagine next time we'll be working on Old Blue, I imagine. So talk to you later.